She was 107 years old, and the journalist sitting across from her asked the question everyone always asks, that what's your secret? She paused. She looked at her hands, and then she said something so simple, so quietly devastating, that the journalist put down her pen, not because it was profound, because she'd been doing the opposite her entire life. And she had a feeling most of you have been too. Over the last few years, stories like hers have completely changed how I think about time. About the choices we make every single day that seem small, but compound into something we can't undo. Here's what you're going to walk away with from this video. Point 1. You're going to understand why the advice she gave is so hard to follow, even though it sounds obvious when you first hear it. 2. You're going to see the exact moment most people trade the life they actually want for a version of it that's easier to explain to other people. Point 3. And this is the one that changes things. You're going to understand what she meant by the one thing. Not as a quote, as a way of living. This isn't a video about longevity, it's a video about what you do with the years you already have. Stay with me. Her name was Marisol. She grew up in a small coastal town where nobody expected much from anyone. She married at 22. Raised 3 children, buried a husband, outlived 2 of her closest friends, and made it to 107 with her mind completely intact. When people visited her, journalists, family, strangers who'd heard about her, they always expected wisdom wrapped in a story. Something grand. A near-death experience. A philosophy she'd built over decades. What they got instead was a woman who laughed easily, forgot nothing, and seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that she had been alive for over a century. The journalist who sat with her that afternoon had spent months interviewing people in their final chapters. She told me the pattern she kept seeing in everyone who seemed at peace, and in everyone who didn't. The ones who were restless, who had regrets they couldn't quite put down, shared one thing in common. It wasn't that they'd made wrong choices. It was that they had let other people's comfort determine their direction, every detour. Every dream quietly folded up and put in a drawer. Every time they chose the safer version of themselves, it was almost always because someone else would have been uncomfortable with the real one. And here's the thing Marisol said that the journalist couldn't stop thinking about afterwards. She said, the opinions of people who don't have to live your life should not be allowed to run it. That sounds simple, maybe even obvious. But here's the question I want you to sit with. The one this whole video is building toward. If you already know that, why haven't you lived like it? We'll come back to that. Because the answer is not what you think. Point 1. The opinion trap doesn't feel like a trap. Here's what nobody tells you about living for other people's approval. It never announces itself. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, today I'm going to let my mother-in-law's disappointment become the blueprint for my career. Nobody consciously decides, I'll stay in this city I don't love because my friends would think I was being dramatic if I left. It happens in the gaps. In the small moments where you almost said the real thing, and then softened it. Where you almost made the bold move, and then found a reason why now wasn't the right time. Marisol called it the slow shrink. She said most people don't lose themselves all at once. They lose themselves in pieces. And each piece is so small, so reasonable, so justifiable, that by the time they notice what's happened, they're living a life that fits everyone else perfectly. And fits them not at all. The trap isn't that you made one wrong choice. The trap is that you made 1,000 almost right choices, all in the direction of least friction, and friction, it turns out, is often just the feeling of becoming yourself. But here's where it gets harder, because knowing this, really sitting with it, leads most people to a second problem they weren't expecting. Point 2. The story you tell yourself about why there's always a reason why this isn't the right time. Why the practical thing is also the wise thing. Why you're not being fearful, you're being realistic. The journalist asked Marisol if she'd ever played it safe. Marisol laughed. She said, of course, many times, but I always knew I was doing it. The dangerous ones are the people who convinced themselves that the safe choice was also the brave one. That line stopped me cold the first time I heard it. Because we are all, at various points in our lives, extremely good at telling ourselves a story that makes our smallest choices sound like maturity, like wisdom, like we're doing the responsible thing. When sometimes, not always, but sometimes, we're just scared. And we've dressed the fear up in language that sounds like logic. Marisol said the years she was proudest of were not the years she was bravest. They were the years she was honest. Honest about what she wanted. Honest about why she was hesitating. Honest about whose voice was running in her head when she thought she was making her own decisions. That honesty, she said, is the hardest thing a person can practice. And it leads directly to the third point, which is the one most people skip entirely. Point 3. The permission you were never supposed to need. Here's what that actually means. The piece that Marisol said she wished someone had told her at 30, that you do not need a tragedy to change direction. This is the part people miss that we tell ourselves. When something big happens, I'll reassess. When I lose the job. When the relationship ends. When I get sick. When someone I love dies, and I'm standing at a graveside thinking about my own life, that we treat crisis as the only legitimate reason to pivot. To choose differently. To stop doing the thing that's making us small. But Marisol made it to 107, and she said the most powerful changes she ever made came from nothing more dramatic than a quiet afternoon where she finally decided to tell the truth to herself. No catalyst. No rock bottom. No permission from the universe. Just a decision. Not roughly. Specifically. She said the moment she stopped waiting to feel ready and started acting like the version of herself she actually wanted to be, everything shifted. Not the circumstances. Her relationship to them. The person who was waiting for a sign, she said, was always going to be waiting, because the sign was never coming from outside. And this is the point where I want you to hold something uncomfortable for a moment, because what Marisol said next is the piece of this story I almost left out. The piece that is hardest to hear. And the one that matters most. We'll get there in a second. Point 4. What she said about regret. The journalist asked her if she had regrets. Everyone asks this. Everyone expects the same answer. No regrets. I'd do it all again. Everything happened for a reason. Marisol shook her head. She said, I have regrets. Anyone who says otherwise is lying or hasn't thought about it seriously enough. Then she said something that reframed regret entirely. She said her regrets were not about the things she did. Every mistake she made, every wrong turn, she could trace the lesson back through it. She could find a reason. Her regrets were about the things she didn't do. The conversations she never started. The version of herself she kept promising she'd step into later. The years she gave to a version of her life that was fine, comfortable, acceptable, not unhappy, when she knew, somewhere underneath all of it, that fine was not what she had come here to be. She said, fine is the most seductive trap there is. Because it doesn't hurt enough to make you leave. That sentence is worth sitting with. Fine doesn't hurt enough to make you leave, so you stay. And the years go. And one day you're sitting across from a journalist at 107, and you realize that the life you lived, however long it was, contained so much more space for the real you than you ever actually used. And the question, the one I promised we'd come back to, is sitting right there. So, why don't we live it, even when we know it? Here's the answer Marisol gave. And I want you to hear it as plainly as she said it. She said, because it is easier to manage what other people think of you than to manage what you think of yourself. Read that again slowly. Managing other people's opinions is concrete. You can see their faces. You can hear their words. You can adjust. You can course correct. There's feedback. Managing your relationship with yourself. Being honest about what you want, what you're afraid of, what you've been avoiding, that has no external mirror. It demands a kind of courage that nobody claps for. And so we outsource the navigation of our own lives to people who, as Marisol said, don't have to live them. The one advice she gave, the thing she said changed everything, was this: stop asking people who aren't you what you should do with your life. And start listening to the part of yourself that already knows. That's it. Not complicated. Not dramatic. Just ruthlessly, uncomfortably true. And here's what this connects to, because hearing something like this is only the beginning. The harder question is, what do you actually do with it in the days that follow? That's exactly what the next video gets into. If something in this video moved something in you, follow that feeling. The next video is about the exact moment people stop outsourcing their decisions, and what life actually looks like on the other side of that shift. It'll be the most useful thing you watch this week. It's right there. Go.